Hello and welcome to today's graphic design tip of the day. For today's tip, I'm going to be showing you how to paint in Adobe Photoshop. You can also use Photopea, which is a free program and has a lot of the same options that Photoshop does. It actually looks very, very similar with its structure. I'm going to be actually painting today just using a mouse, so I just have this mouse, but it is highly recommended if you are able to, if you're going to continue with painting in Photoshop specifically, that you do get some sort of tablet. Wacom tablets are really great, and with those, using the pen that comes with it or pencil that comes with it, you can actually adjust up here at the top of Photoshop the pressure of your brush, and that's going to let you get softer or lighter lines on your design, thinner lines when you're pressing lighter, and then darker lines as you're pressing harder with your pencil, just like you would if you were really drawing on paper. So that's a really cool tip, but with today's tutorial, it's just gonna be with a mouse, so I'm gonna show you how to blend and go through some processes to give it that same illusion of having that pressure without actually using a tablet. Okay, so to get started, you can see here that I have my image and I just drew out a really rough outline of what my object is going to look like. I always recommend sketching first before you draw. You can even sketch right on top of a picture and then just move the picture over if that's a little bit easier to trace something rather than drawing it just by eyeballing it. So on here then I also made a copy of my layer. So by dragging my picture layer to my new layer button, I made two of that same layer, and I can go up to Image, Adjustments, and over to Posterize. This is a good way as you're getting started, especially if you haven't really painted before, to break your subject down into more simple areas of value. You can see the further I drag this over, the more areas of value it's going to give me, but this is going to make it a little bit simpler for the eye to tell where the different color values are going to go. So let's keep it at 7 for my example here. And then I'm going to go ahead and grab my brush tool. Now with my brush tool, I'm going to use the hard round pressure size that automatically comes with it because I want some crisp edges to start my design. And I also have my opacity set down to 56 and my flow at 54. I'm going to be adjusting that as I go for different areas that I want to kind of layer on top of each other to give it that painterly look. Now, the cool thing about Photoshop, if you hold down your Option button or Alt if you're on a PC, you can actually grab a color right from the picture. And then using your bracket keys on your keyboard, if I click on the right one, you can see my brush gets bigger. If I click on the left, it gets smaller. That gives me a nice, easy way to go ahead and make it bigger when I need it and smaller when I need it without having to go all the way up to the top there. Now for this side, I'm actually going to put my opacity back up quite a bit. Let's go almost all the way up. Try that again. There we go. A little bit bolder of a color. And I'm just looking at where that darkest value is here and filling that in. Okay, and then let's grab the next one that's in here. Now, it's never going to be this harsh where if I color this color right next to it, I want it to kind of slightly transition over into this color just little by little rather than just being such a harsh line in between. So one great way to do that is to grab one of the two of your colors and turn your opacity again way down and just kind of go along the edge and start to make that kind of medium value. Obviously, the lower your opacity goes, the more subtle of a look it's going to be. We're also going to be able to blend these, as I said before. I'm going to grab the darker one now and do the same thing back and forth. Starting to get a little bit more of a transition then versus having such a harsh line in between. All right, great. Let's grab our next color over here. So kind of this main body color, red, and I'll turn my opacity almost all the way back up again. See how that bracket key really comes in handy there so that I can make those transitions very quickly. And then again, I'll grab that darker value and turn it way back down again so that I can just softly touch that edge and it's not as harsh of a transition, and then I'll blend it even more here in a minute. Okay, and then the last part is this really bright red up here at the top. I'll put it back up again. Right where that major highlight is going to go. But the highlights you can see are really mostly around the seeds. So we don't want the red to be highlighted right now because we're going to be blending this together. All right, now I have a couple little details here, like there's a shadow that comes into this side, so I'm gonna go ahead and grab that shadow color again and turn my opacity way down so that I can subtly add a little bit of the shadow into this side. There's a little bit up here as well. Really paying attention to where those values change is important. And then my darkest value is going to be down here, so that's a new one that I haven't added yet. There's actually a little bit of a bright spot over here as well, so let's grab that brighter red and start to touch this side just a little bit right here. Awesome, and now I'm ready to blend these reds to give it more of that painterly look. So again, if I was using a tablet, then I wouldn't have to necessarily do this step, but it's a good thing to know anyways, especially if you're using a mouse. So the smudge tool, if I just go little by little, I can smudge this layer, and it's going to start to blend these colors together. Don't try to smudge a bunch at once. Keep it in little brush strokes, just like you're blending with a real brush. You will see that it runs a little bit, just like paint really would. Once I have it smudged to the extent that I want it, you can also go underneath the same option over here and go to the blur tool. Just like your brushes for any of those tools over there, you can use your bracket keys and still make them bigger and smaller. And this is going to be my final step here of just blending, of going over with this blur tool. You can also adjust how much it's blurring up here, if it's too strong or not strong enough. You don't want to lose all of the texture. This is supposed to look like a painting, so don't go crazy, just little bits. All right, I'm ready for the next step. I would recommend, as you're working in here, as you continue on, to always make a new layer on top when you're going to do something drastic. That way, if you want to go back to what you had before, you can always go back to the layer below it, or you can delete the layer if you don't like it. So let's go ahead and grab our brush tool again, and I'm going to grab, using my Alt or Option button, the yellow from the seed. And the great thing about working on the computer and not on an actual canvas is that I can zoom in as close as I want to. So for something like the seeds of the strawberry, the bigger the screen is for you to draw from, the easier it's going to be to draw. make it just a little bit more yellow. I'm just going to look at the original strawberry, kind of see where they are. They don't have to be exactly the same, but just so that I can get some ideas from the structure, because when you draw from a real thing, it's definitely always going to be better than just kind of eyeballing it and trying to guess what they would look like. Draw from an actual reference whenever you possibly can. I'm going to go back to my original picture, so I'm actually going to cut this picture. I had my drawing on the same layer. So I'm just going to delete that picture so that I'm back to my original, so I can see the real strawberry as I'm drawing, and move that over a little bit closer. I can actually remove some of this outside of this picture too, because I don't need all this. Alright, now that I have the seeds on here, we want to start making them look like they're kind of embedded into the strawberry itself. So I'm actually going to go back to my paint layer here of my actual strawberry and make a copy of it, just in case I don't like what I end up doing, but I am going to paint on this layer again. And instead of using my paintbrush, I'm actually going to go over to my dodge tool. And using my dodge tool on this layer, I'm going to set my exposure down quite a bit, so just little bits at a time. Mid-tone should work for the color that I'm using right now. We'll try it and make sure my hardness is all the way down. And you can see how each one of these little seeds is kind of surrounded by a little highlight here. So you can start to form those little grooves or highlights little by little. The slower that you go with the transition, like I said, the better and more realistic your painting is going to look. But again, it is a painting. We're not trying to make something that looks completely photorealistic right now. Alright, so now I circled all of those several times using very low exposure with my dodge tool to give it really that nice texture as if the seeds are kind of inset into the strawberry itself. So great way to add highlights onto your object of whatever you're drawing or creating. Of course, the actual highlights, the really white highlights, those we're going to add later on their own layer. But now we have these little shadows around the outside of our seeds. So we can actually do the opposite of what we just did for our highlights and use the burn tool. So I need to make sure I'm on my layer with my seeds. And actually I have them on 2 layers, so I'm going to merge those together. And switching over to my burn tool, go back to just like a standard brush here, a nice fuzzy brush. And for these, I would zoom in very, very close, make my brush really small. And using the burn tool, you can go around the outside edges. And because these seeds are on a different layer, you don't have to worry about getting any of this burning onto the strawberry surface itself. It will only stay on the seeds, so that's super nice. Give them that more three-dimensional look and as if they're kind of embedded or have that shadow to them. When you're adding your highlights and shadows, also think about where your light source is. Try to keep it the same as your photo, or if you're making your own light source, just make sure it stays consistent. Wherever that light is going to hit your object, then you're gonna have those brighter highlights, and then on that opposite side, you're always going to get those deeper shadows. But also think about reflection. If a surface has a reflective surface, you're also going to get that light that is going to shine back to your object too, giving that little extra glow, maybe even where the darkest shadow is. So think about your light source, look at reference photos, definitely going to make your painting much stronger than just drawing it for hand. Okay, so now my seeds look a little bit more realistic there, but I still don't have those really bright highlights on top of the strawberries, so I'm going to go ahead and make a brand new layer on top of that, and grab just that white color that's on top of there. And I do want to turn my opacity pretty far down again because I want this to be a subtle transition. Again, make sure it's on a new layer so that if you mess up, you can delete it, and also I'm going to blur this layer. Okay, so once I have this new layer on here, I want to blend it just a little bit, and instead of going to my blending tool this time, I'm going to go up to filter and down to blur and over to Gaussian blur. I want to turn that way down. And just pull it over until you get the amount of blur that you're looking for. So that looks about good. And then I'm going to go ahead and make another layer on top of this again. This time I'm going to jump to actual white, and I'm going to put in those brightest spots of my highlights. Okay, and then I'll go up to filter, down to blur, and open to Gaussian blur. Again, it's super important that you did that on a separate layer, so that when you blur this one, that you're not blurring the other one again, because then it'll just really mesh with the colors of your design. And I could continue to do that if I wanted it to be even a harsher contrast. I could make one more layer on top of there, and then go back to the absolute brightest spots on here, and just touch them one more time and blur them just a touch. Okay, and the same way we just did those highlights, which I'm gonna move those onto the same layer. Here's my seeds, here's my highlights that I just added. So I'm gonna go ahead and make a layer specifically for the shadows then. Let's make that on top here, and this time I'm gonna go ahead and change it to actual black. And turn my opacity down a bit. I'm just going to enhance some of these areas down here that should have a little bit more intense shadow. And again, filter, blur, Gaussian blur. All right, great. Now I do have some of this paint hanging off the outside, and I do have a couple little spots here on my actual paint layer. Actually, it's on both of these, so I'm gonna go ahead and merge these two together. And I can use my regular lasso tool to nicely draw an edge to this. Just circle back to the beginning and hit delete. Oh, it was all the way down here, so I'm going to make a new layer. And just drop in some white. Ooh, on this layer I still have some on the outside. So let's go ahead again with the lasso tool. So you can always touch up edges like this. Just grab the section, hit delete. Okay, and then I would be ready to go ahead and start making the top of the strawberry and finish it off the same way of building those layers on top of each other to create the final product. So here's what it looks like when it's completely done. I hope you enjoyed today's graphic design tip of the day.